Are you a fan of Jordan Fabrics tutorials too? If you don't know about them, definitely check them out sometime. Donna Jordan demonstrates a lot of nice quilt patterns, and when I saw her mirror tutorial years ago, I knew that that was going on the bucket list. You have a quilting bucket list, right? I can't be the only one. So anyway, this is what her video looks like if you search it out. And one of the things that I love about her tutorials is that it looks like she makes a quilt just that one time. Or so it seems. It's hard to say. But unlike most of the quilting tutorials by well-known quilters, where they have a quilt hanging in the back that they're demonstrating for the video, and then they have it laid out to where it's like step by step and they end up making a quilt basically like 5 times. Donna Jordan doesn't seem to do that. I don't know about you, but I have no idea how complicated a quilt might be when I'm watching one of these quilt tutorials that's by that more traditional format of making it a bunch of times before they ever turn on the camera and the lights. But here's what I love about Jordan Fabrics in particular. I can get a sense of how complicated or fiddly a quilt might be by watching how many different outfits Donna wears in that video. Don't know what I'm talking about? In this video, she ends up wearing 1, then 2, then 3 outfits. So what that tells me is that this is maybe a medium difficulty kind of pattern. Anyway, so enough of that and let's get to the fun stuff. So here's the pattern printed out from their website. It is free. I don't have the greatest printer, but the text is fine. And so for this, you need 2.5 strips. They show 12, but because I made this lap-sized, I was able to do it with half a yard of each. And so here you go. That's a 3x3 grid, and theirs is a 4x4 grid. So if you think of it like 4 times 4 is 16, 3 times 3 is 9. 9 is just a little bit more than half of 16. And then for an extra level of difficulty, I decided, and also just for the sake of experimentation, I decided to time how long it would take to do this. So here I'm going through and I'm cutting my 2.5-inch strips. And cutting strips is kind of boring, so I'm just going to go through this pretty quickly here. The reason why I'm timing it is because I like the idea of being able to figure out just how long it actually takes to make a quilt. Because like I was saying in the beginning, it's really hard to know just how long it takes to make a quilt. I think that the way that they do their tutorials kind of gives me a better sense. But even then, I mean, they say on their description that they have 15 people on their production team, so I just really have no way of knowing if she has extra people who might be sewing some of these strip pieces, you know, or sewing blocks in other videos, etc. So, and I know that's a common thing with productions like that, so as somebody just doing it by myself, I just wanted to see just how long it takes for me to do this. So here, I'm actually pairing my strips up together. I'm going to set the stitch length on my machine to 2 millimeters. And that way, whenever I cut these, I'm not going to have them with a tendency to kind of come apart, because I will be subcutting these down later. So right now I'm just lining them up, and then I'm going to start stitching. So I just keep doing that until I've gone through and done the first set. And whenever Donna shows this, she's showing like one strip set at a time. But I know it's more efficient if I do all of the strip sets at once. And so that's why I'm doing it this way. And I think if you're doing this at home and you have experience as a quilter, you're probably going to do the same thing. So here I have my first ones laid out that I have sewn together. And then I'm just going to go ahead and finger press it to the side, like shown there. And that's just like the fork that I have. I like to use that fork for things like getting safety pins in and out of pieces because it makes it just easier. So just to do that, it took me over an hour. Oh my gosh. So anyway, so I'm going to get the next two pieces sewn up together here. So now I have those done because there's no sense really showing that at the sewing machine, and I'm going to get the last two pieces together. And now that I have those into 2 little strips each, I can go ahead and start sewing 2 together and then eventually get all 6 of these together. So just to get to that point took me nearly 6 hours, and so now I have all of those sets and it's all 6 of the strips together, and now I'm going to go ahead and press this with the iron. So now looking at the pattern, I'm figuring out what I need to cut these into for the squares. And so you should probably look at the pattern, but I believe the pattern said 12.5 inches. And I just kind of squared that up so that it'll be nice and straight there. And then, yep, 12.5 inches. So I'm just lining that up and I'm going to cut up my squares. And then with this last bit here, I'm able to subcut that into the 2.5 inch strips, and that will end up going kind of like a header and footer part of the border area, like kind of part of a border, I guess. So now that I have all of those strips cut up, I have the squares, and I have the 2 different ways that it's going to be cut diagonal. So I'm getting this positioned so that I can do that. And I will be using the diagonal line on my cutting mat. And then that way I can just take my longer ruler and be able to just cut that right along there. And I'll have perfect right triangles. And then to cut it the other way, I ended up just rotating it, and then that will give me the diagonal going in the other direction, because my cutting mat really only has those lines going in kind of one direction. So to get that other angle, you just rotate it 90 degrees and then go ahead and cut, and that's gonna give the other angle. I mean, I suppose you could flip it to the backside and then do it that way, and that would work. But that just happened to be how I did it. So here, the pattern is showing how it needs to be laid out. So I'm just positioning my pieces here so that I know where to lay these out. And then one of the things that I like to do, because I find that it's just easier, and this is not something that Donna does in her videos, is I have an engineered corner tool, and that makes it so that I can take that little bit of the 1/4 inch edge off of the tip. It makes it so, number one, I don't have to cut off dog ears later, but what I like it for most importantly is that it makes it so that I can line everything up. And so instead of eyeballing it, and I just found over time that with eyeballing it, that I would end up having to seam rip at some point because I just would get it a little bit off. You know, I would get it like maybe a 1/16 of an inch off, and then it wouldn't be a nice straight line. And it's very important that these rows are nice and straight, because otherwise you're not going to get your intersection points all nice. So this is the backing fabric that I'm using, and it also happens to be the setting triangles as described in the pattern. And so the nice thing about that is I got it as an actual backing fabric, which ends up being like, I think 108 inches wide. So it's very, very long strips. And what I did was I measured just a little bit more than what I needed, and I just ripped, you know, I made a little nick, and then I just ripped the whole thing, length of fabric, and then that way that gives me what I need. And so I'm able to subcut that down into the size squares that they indicate in the pattern, and I'm just going to clean up all of those edges, because whenever you rip fabric, you do end up with a slight amount of warp. So I'm getting that all nice and cleaned up. And the nice thing about doing that is it's also going to keep those grains really nice and straight. And it just makes it easier to sew. And so now I have that all trimmed up. I'm ready to cut on that 45 degree. And then that is going to give me those setting triangles that I need for those rows. So at this point, I'm already 7 hours into the project. And right here, I'm just setting up the first thing, also doing the engineered corners on those setting triangles. So here I have it laid out so that I can have my rows. It looks like up above I have a row that I already stitched and pressed. And it's just really simple, you know, it's just like with anything else that you just put it together, you line it up. And because I have those engineered corners, I have a nice, even, flat sort of thing on both sides. And then I can just pin it and take it to my sewing machine and get those put together 2 by 2, and then eventually joining all of those 2 pieces together into the long rows. And so there I have 2 by 2s that are sewn up, and then I'm going to pin those together after I've lined it up. And it's just, you know, pretty easy at this point. I'm just going through and I'm chain piecing the parts of the rows that I'm in. And, you know, it's just pretty straightforward at this point. Okay, wow, over 11 hours into this project. But I'm pretty far along at this point. I can actually start joining the rows together, and that's going to be most of what this quilt is, at least the quilt top. And so right now I'm just positioning this so that I can get these pinned together at the intersection points. And then that way I'm going to have everything coming together where it's really nice points and just looks very nice. And here is all of the rows. And so basically that part of the quilt top. And for the next step, it's just putting together the those little subcut pieces that I had that were kind of the remnants on the end. And I was able to have enough of this where I could go all the way across a piece on the top and the bottom. And I actually ended up having a little bit left over, and so what I ended up doing is I just tried to kind of see if I could match it up and not necessarily have like the same fabric against each other. So that's what I'm kind of doing here, is I'm figuring out how I'm going to lay it out. Now that I have that little strip border sewed onto the top and bottom, I can go ahead and sew that outer border. And I'm pretty sure that's 2.5 inches. Just, you know, check the pattern, because that's what I went by. And I'm sewing it on here, just doing the finishing touches to this quilt top. And here it is, all finished for just the quilt top, not quilted yet. And so over 16 hours, about 16 1/3 hours is what it took for me to make this as a lap size quilt. And here it is, all finished with the quilting. I don't have the phone to show you, but it did end up being 25 hours right on the nose. So for me to do the sandwiching and the basting and all of the quilting, it took me almost 9 hours just to do that part alone. So you can understand why a lot of people will send their quilt tops out to a long armor. So I hope you enjoyed this video. While you're here, you might want to check out this video that I did right here, where it is a double bargello using an interleave technique. Thanks for watching.